You ever hear a story that sounds like it was ripped from some dusty, forgotten book, but it feels so real it makes the hairs on your arms stand up? This is one of those stories. It's about a woman named Clara Mitchell and a world that tried to burn her to the ground. But it didn't know she was made of fire. The smoke clawed at the sky, thick and black, like a serpent trying to swallow the sun. Down below, Clara Mitchell was eating floorboards. Splinters dug into her cheek, a sharp, ragged pain that was nothing compared to the sound of her world ending. Crack! Another volley of gunfire. More glass raining down, sharp and glittering like cruel diamonds. The air was a toxic cocktail of gunpowder and burning pine, thick enough to choke on. "Stay down, Clara!" Her father's voice, but it was wrong. It was thin, brittle. She twisted her head, the splinters scraping her skin, and she saw him. He was slumped against the counter, a single impossible flower of red blooming across his white shirt. His Winchester rifle lay just beyond his fingertips. He was still reaching for it. Then came the cries, high, ululating sounds that vibrated in her bones and turned her blood to ice. Apache. The whispered bogeymen from the trading post stories were real, and they were right outside. Hooves thundered, circling the tiny settlement of Bitter Creek like buzzards. Dust and smoke swirled together, a suffocating shroud. Through a crack in the floor, Clara watched Mrs. Henderson make a run for the church. A fool's hope. An arrow took her between the shoulder blades. She didn't even scream, just crumpled. A rag doll tossed in the dirt. Her yellow bonnet rolled away, a pathetic spot of sunshine in a world gone gray. Clara's hands shook so hard she could barely crawl. She moved toward her father, the word a silent prayer on her lips. "Papa." His eyes were already somewhere else, glazed, empty. She pressed her hand to the wound, but the blood was a hot, slick tide that her small hand couldn't stop. It was his life, pouring out between her fingers. And then the front door didn't just open, it exploded. Splintered wood flew through the air. 3 warriors burst in, their faces a nightmare of black and red paint. The leader was tall, lean, his chest a road map of old scars. His eyes swept the room, and Clara knew instantly that they missed nothing. He barked an order in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together. The other 2 began to tear the store apart. Shelves were overturned. Flour and beans cascaded across the floor, mixing with her father's blood. Their entire life scattered in the dust. Clara scrambled backward, her spine hitting the rough wall. She was trapped. The scarred warrior moved toward her. His moccasins made no sound. He walked like a predator, with a fluid grace that was terrifying. Up close, she saw the notches carved into the stock of his rifle. Each one a story, each one a life. He looked at her, not like a person, but like livestock, a curiosity. "Please," she whispered, her throat raw. "I have nothing." He didn't answer. He just reached down, and his hand clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a human grip. It was iron, calloused and brutal. He yanked her to her feet like she weighed nothing. She tried to pull away, a useless panic struggle. He just dragged her, past her father's body, past the ruins of their store, out into the burning daylight. Bitter Creek was gone. The church steeple, the one that had called them to Sunday service just 3 days ago, collapsed in a geyser of sparks. Bodies littered the street, faces she knew, people she'd shared coffee with, traded goods with. Now just shapes in the dust. The warriors moved with a practiced, horrifying efficiency, gathering horses, weapons, anything of value. She was shoved toward a paint pony, its sides heaving. The scarred warrior swung up behind her, his arm locking around her waist like a steel band. She could smell him. Smoke, sweat, and something wild and clean, like sage after a storm. As they rode away, Clara took one last look at her home. It was just another column of black smoke, twisting like a dying snake against the vast, indifferent Arizona sky. They didn't just ride. They fled, a pack of ghosts melting into the desert. There were maybe 20 braves and a handful of captives. Clara recognized Sarah, the baker's daughter, her face a blank mask of shock, and little Tommy Morrison, no older than 12, tears carving clean lines through the dirt on his cheeks. The hours bled into one another. The scrub brush turned to rocky canyons. The flat plains rose into towering mesas. The Apache followed trails that weren't there, reading the land like a language she couldn't understand. All Clara could do was hold on. Just hold on and not fall. When they finally stopped at a hidden spring, her legs gave out. She hit the ground and crawled to the water, gulping it down until the scarred warrior yanked her back by her hair. He barked something at her, and the other braves laughed. It was a harsh, cruel sound. One of the younger ones tied her wrists with rawhide. It bit into her skin, raw and unforgiving. They gave her a piece of dried meat that tasted like leather and a single sip of water. It was a clear message. You are not a person. You are property. As dawn painted the rocks the color of blood, they climbed higher, into the heart of Apache territory. The air grew thin. Her simple dress was in tatters. Her feet bled inside her worn-out boots. Each step was a fresh agony. Sarah hadn't spoken a single word. Her eyes were vacant. Tommy had learned that crying only earned him a cuff to the head. Clara wanted to offer some comfort, but what could she say? What words could possibly mean anything after what they'd seen? On the second night, they reached the camp. It was a collection of wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings made of hide and brush, nestled in a valley protected by towering cliffs. Smoke from cook fires drifted lazily into the sky. Dogs barked, faces appeared in doorways, eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and pure, undiluted hate. The scarred warrior hauled her off the horse. Her legs buckled again, and again, he didn't wait. He dragged her through the center of the camp. The other warriors called out to him, their voices laced with respect. Or maybe it was fear. The Apache women stared as she passed. Some spat on the ground. They took in her torn dress, her tangled auburn hair, her pale skin. She tried to meet their gazes, tried to find some ember of defiance inside the overwhelming terror. They stopped before a larger wickiup, set apart from the rest. The warrior called out. An old woman emerged, her face 1,000 deep lines, each one telling a story of sorrow. She looked Clara over like a horse trader, checking her teeth, feeling her arms. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. She nodded at the warrior and gestured to a smaller dwelling. Clara was shoved inside. Sarah and 2 other women were already there, huddled together in the smoky darkness. A guard was posted at the entrance, his rifle gleaming in the firelight. They were caged. "What will they do with us?" Sarah finally whispered, her voice a tiny, broken thing. Clara pulled the younger girl close, but she had no answer. Outside, the drums started, a low, steady rhythm that felt like the terrified pounding of her own heart. She couldn't bring herself to say what they all feared, that the swift death of an arrow in Bitter Creek might have been the kindest fate. The drums beat on, a pulse in the heart of the mountains. Clara stared up through the smoke hole at the cold, distant stars. She thought of her father's last, ragged breath, of the life that had vanished in a single afternoon of fire and blood. She knew tomorrow would bring new horrors, but as she lay there, a strange, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. She was battered, terrified, and broken-hearted, but she was alive, and she would not make it easy for them. Whatever came next, she would not go meekly. She would not surrender, for if she was going to die in this valley of shadows, she would die on her feet. The sun hit the canyon like a physical blow. Clara woke to the sounds of a life she didn't recognize. Women talking, pottery clattering, children laughing. The sheer normalcy of it was jarring. An Apache woman entered their wickiup, her face hard, and gestured for them to come out. They were herded like cattle toward the center of the camp. They were brought before a group of elders, their faces like ancient leather, seated in a semicircle. At the center sat a man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. White Eagle, the chief. The scarred warrior who'd captured her stepped forward. He pointed to each captive, speaking rapidly in Apache. Clara heard a single word repeated over and over. Tasa. The elders murmured. Some nodded. Some shook their heads. Then White Eagle raised a hand. Silence. He looked directly at Clara. His English was thick with an accent, but the words were clear. You are strong, not break like others. His eyes were like chips of obsidian. This is why you chosen. Chosen for what? Clara's voice was surprisingly steady. The chief's face was unreadable. Our greatest warrior lies dying. No Apache woman may see his weakness. It is forbidden. He gestured at her, a dismissive flick of the wrist. But you are nothing. You can tend him without breaking sacred law. The blood drained from Clara's face. I'm not a healer. You learn, the chief said, his tone flat, stating a fact. Or you die. He glanced at Sarah and the others. They become slaves, wives if they are lucky. You have a different purpose. The scarred warrior grabbed her arm. What about them? Clara cried, trying to pull away. Their fate is not your concern. She was dragged away as Sarah called her name. The sound was a knife in her heart. She was being led to a large wickiup, painted with spirals and lightning bolts. The warrior called out. A voice from within answered, deep and rough with pain. They entered the dim interior. The smell hit her first, herbs, smoke, and the sweet, sick scent of infection. And then she saw him. He was massive, stretched out on a bed of buffalo robes. His body was a landscape of scars. Knife wounds, bullet holes, old burns. His chest rose and fell with a shallow, ragged rhythm. But it was his face that stole her breath. It was a face carved from granite, all sharp angles and brutal beauty. Black hair spilled across the furs like ink. Then his eyes opened. They were fever bright, but sharp and intelligent, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her stumble backward. He spoke, and the second major twist of her new life fell into place. His English was perfect, unaccented. So, he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips, they send me a white woman to watch me die. The scarred warrior spoke quickly in Apache, gesturing at Clara. The dying man, Taza, listened, his eyes never leaving her face. When the warrior finished, Taza let out a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together, a sound that ended in a bloody cough. Leave us, he commanded in Apache. The scarred warrior bowed his head slightly and left. They were alone. The wickiup suddenly felt impossibly small. Clara could see the wound now, a festering gash along his ribs, angry red streaks spreading out like poison. Come closer, little rabbit, Taza said, his voice a low rasp. I won't bite. Not enough strength for it. I told them I'm no healer, Clara repeated, frozen by the entrance. No, but you can follow instructions. He shifted, a grimace of pain flashing across his face. Unless you'd prefer to join your friends? I hear a warrior named Standing Bear has his eye on the young one. The casual threat was a slap. Clara's hands clenched into fists. She strode forward, her chin high. What do you want me to do? Water in the gourd? Cloths in the basket. Clean the wound. He closed his eyes. And try not to faint. She worked in a fury of anger and fear. The wound was worse up close. Deep, ragged, the flesh swollen and hot to the touch. She tried to be gentle, but every touch made the muscles under her hands tense like stone. He never made a sound. This close she could see the details of his face, a thin scar through one eyebrow. Laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes. You're different, he said suddenly, his eyes still closed. How would you know? She shot back. Because you're angry, not afraid. A faint smile touched his lips. Fear is useless. Anger. Anger can be a weapon. She didn't respond, her fingers tracing a long, jagged scar across his chest without thinking. His hands shot out, impossibly fast, and locked around her wrist. His eyes snapped open, dark and unreadable. Curiosity, he said softly, his voice a velvet growl, killed the white woman. You're burning with fever, Clara said, refusing to let him see her fear. This wound is killing you. Everything dies, he said, releasing her. Some of us just take longer than others. She finished applying a fresh poultice of herbs. All the while she felt his eyes on her, studying her, dissecting her. It was like being watched by a wolf. What's your name? He asked. Clara Mitchell. Clara, he rolled the name over his tongue. It means bright. Are you bright, Clara Mitchell? Bright enough to know this needs more than herbs. He laughed again, a softer sound this time. You speak your mind. That will either get you killed here, or it will save you. And which do you think it will be? He studied her for a long, silent moment. That, he said, Depends entirely on you. An elderly woman, the one called Grey Dove, entered with a pot of broth. She shot Clara a look of pure venom. You see his weakness, she said in broken English, jabbing a finger at Clara. You die, understand? Clara nodded. Cheerful, isn't she? Taza murmured after the woman left. She thinks I should have died in battle, not waste away like this. Clara helped him sit up to eat. Her arm brushed against his bare skin. It was hot, electric. She pulled away quickly. His wickiup was a warrior's den. A rifle, a bow, a lance decorated with feathers, and scalps. She tried not to look at the scalps. You're thinking you've been caged with a monster, Taza said, setting the bowl aside. Haven't I? Perhaps. He lay back down, exhaustion etched on his face. But remember, little rabbit, monsters are made, not born. As she reached the entrance, she paused. Why do you speak English so well? He didn't open his eyes. Know your enemy. I spent 2 years at the white man's school in Carlisle. They tried to kill the Apache in me. A cold, thin smile touched his lips. They failed. Clara stepped back out into the harsh sunlight, her mind reeling. She was nursemaid to a legend. A killer, a man who embodied everything she'd been taught to fear. But she couldn't shake his words. Monsters are made, not born. She thought of Bitter Creek, of her father's blood on her hands. Maybe they were all monsters here, and maybe, just maybe, the only way to survive a monster is to learn to understand him. 3 days. For 3 days, Clara entered the smoky wickiup, a cave where a predator lay waiting. And each day the fever got worse. Tonight he was barely conscious. A sheen of sweat coated his skin, and his breathing was a shallow, ugly rasp. The wound smelled worse, a sweet, rotten scent that turned her stomach. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling. You're late, he murmured, his eyes still closed. The women had me grinding corn until my hands bled. Good. Soft hands are useless here. She pulled back the bandage and bit her lip. The red streaks had spread, crawling up his ribs like poisonous veins. This is getting worse. Observant little rabbit, he mocked, his voice rough with pain. She pressed the cloth to the wound, maybe a little harder than necessary. He tensed but made no other sound. His eyes opened, locking onto hers. You're afraid of me, he said. It wasn't a question. Shouldn't I be? Yes, he said, simple and direct, but not for the reasons you think. What reasons, then? A ghost of a smile. Because I see you, Clara Mitchell. I see the fire you hide, the part of you that didn't shatter when your world burned. He shifted, suppressing a groan. That's what should frighten you, not me. What you might discover about yourself in this place. Clara was stunned into silence. He saw too much. You don't know anything about me? She finally managed. Don't I? His hand moved, quick as a snake, and caught her wrist. His grip was still shockingly strong. Then why do your hands turn gentle when you think I'm sleeping? Why do you trace my scars with curiosity instead of disgust? Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm doing what I must to survive. Lie to yourself, little rabbit. But we both know there's more. Let go, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Make me. The challenge hung between them, thick and heavy. His pulse throbbed against her skin, fast and hot. This close, she could see tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes. You're burning up, she said softly. Save your strength for fighting the fever, not me. Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise. Maybe even respect. He released her wrist, his fingers trailing over her skin, leaving a path of fire behind. You have spine, he said. It might keep you alive when I'm gone. You're not dying on my watch, she shot back, her voice fierce. I won't give them the satisfaction. He was quiet for a long time as she worked. Then his voice was different, softer. I was 15 when soldiers came to our winter camp. They killed my mother, my sisters. He stared at the smoke hole, but he was seeing something else entirely. That was the day I stopped being a boy and became a weapon. The unexpected confession cracked open something inside her. What did you become? She asked, leaning closer. His eyes found hers. A monster to frighten white children. He paused. But you know the funny thing? Even monsters get lonely. The raw honesty of it hit her like a physical blow. She finished bandaging his wound, her hands moving on their own. As she moved to help him sit up for a drink, he didn't refuse. Her arm went around his shoulders, and for a heart-stopping moment, they were impossibly close. His breath was warm on her neck. Her body screamed at her to pull away, but she didn't. "You should leave now," he said roughly after he drank, "before someone sees." "Sees what?" His smile was as sharp as a shard of glass. "That the legendary Taza has been bewitched by a white woman's magic." She stood to leave, her supplies gathered. At the entrance, she paused. "It's not magic, Taza." "No?" he murmured, his eyes already drifting closed. "Then it's something far more dangerous." Clara stepped out into the cool night air, her hands shaking. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something coiling deep in her belly. He was her enemy, her captor, a killer. But he was also the only person who saw the survivor inside her, instead of the victim. She touched her wrist where he'd held it, the skin still tingling. His words echoed in her head. "What you might discover about yourself here. Maybe the real danger in this valley wasn't the monster in the wiki-up. Maybe it was the monster he was waking up inside of her. 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, the rhythm of her life was the rhythm of his sickness. And then, one morning, something changed. "You're humming," he said as she entered. His voice was stronger, clearer. She stopped. She hadn't even realized. "My mother's lullaby." "Tell me about her." The fever had broken. She could see it in his eyes. The delirium was gone, replaced by that sharp, unnerving intelligence. She tended to his wound, which was finally, slowly, starting to heal. "She was a good woman," Clara said, her voice tight. "The frontier broke my father. It never broke her." "And you?" he asked, his gaze intense. "Did it break you?" Clara paused, a clean cloth in her hand. "I thought it did, when your warriors came." She met his eyes. "But maybe it just burned away everything that wasn't real." "The strong survive," he said. It wasn't cruel, just a statement of fact. A tear she didn't know was coming escaped and rolled down her cheek. Before she could wipe it away, Taza's hand came up. He caught the tear on the tip of his finger with a gentleness that seemed impossible. "Warriors don't cry," she whispered, trying to joke. "The best ones do." He brought his finger to his lips, tasting the salt. The gesture was so intimate, so unexpected, it stole the air from her lungs. "You're delirious again," she stammered. "My fever broke 3 days ago, Clara." His voice dropped, a low rumble that vibrated through her. "And you know it, just like you know this thing that crackles in the air between us." He sat up, his movements still stiff, but filled with a new strength. He was face to face with her now. "Why does your breath catch when I lean close? Why do your hands linger on my skin?" "Because I'm your prisoner." "Is that all?" He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jawline. His touch was electric. She should have pulled away. She leaned into it. "This is madness," she breathed. "Yes," he whispered, his hands sliding into her hair, sending pins scattering. "Beautiful madness." A sharp noise from the entrance made them spring apart like guilty children. Gray Dove stood there, her eyes narrowed, taking in the scene. Clara's flushed face, Taza sitting up, the hairpins on the dirt floor. She spat a string of angry Apache at Taza. He responded calmly, but with an edge of steel. Gray Dove stormed out. "What did she say?" Clara asked, hastily gathering her pins. "Nothing worth repeating." He lay back down, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. "You should go. Now." Clara fled, her heart hammering. The whispers had already started in the camp. She could feel the eyes on her. The Apache women looked at her with a new kind of hatred, not for a captive, but for a rival. Later that day, a commotion erupted. A war party was returning, but they were returning with dead and wounded. They'd been ambushed by soldiers. The mood in the camp turned black. That evening, as Clara approached Taza's wickiup, the drums were beating a rhythm of grief and vengeance. He was dressed, sitting up, cleaning his rifle. He looked like the legend she'd heard stories about. "Running Wolf is dead," he said without looking up. "My cousin's son. What will happen? Blood for blood." He finally looked at her, and his expression was grim. There's talk, Clara. They say the soldiers were looking for the white captives. They're saying this is your fault. Her stomach turned to ice. Is it? It doesn't matter. Some of the warriors are calling for the captives to be killed in retaliation. He reached into a bag and pulled out a necklace made of brilliant blue stones. Wear this. I can't. Wear it, he commanded, his voice urgent. It marks you. It says you are under my protection. It says you are mine. The words hung in the air between them. Mine. To touch you now, he said, his voice low. They would have to challenge me, and they are not foolish enough to do that. Not yet. Her hands trembled as she fastened the necklace. The stones were cool against her skin, but they felt like they were burning a brand into her flesh. I belong to no one, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No, he agreed, standing. Even wounded, he towered over her. But from this moment on, everyone in this valley will know that you belong with me. Outside, the drums for revenge grew louder. Be careful, he warned as she left. This protection comes with a price. She walked back through the camp, the blue stones a heavy weight against her throat. She was no longer just the white captive. She was Taza's woman. She had just been saved from death by being tied to a man who might be leading them all to it. And the most terrifying part? For the first time since Bitter Creek, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt chosen. That night, curiosity and fear drove Clara to the edge of the war council. Hidden in the shadows, she watched the firelight dance on the angry faces of the warriors. A young brave, one she recognized as Walking Bear, was on his feet. He pointed a finger directly at Taza. Clara couldn't understand all the words, but the meaning was clear. Weak, bewitched, white woman. The council exploded into chaos. Taza rose. The silence that followed was absolute. He spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 100 battles. He spoke of strategy, of the soldiers, of the need for a unified people. But his gaze kept finding Clara in the darkness. He knew she was there. Then a hand clamped down on her shoulder. She spun around to see Lozen, the sister of the chief, a warrior woman whose legend was nearly as great as Taza's. Foolish girl, Lozen hissed in English, pulling her away. You meddle in things you cannot understand. She dragged Clara to her own wickiup. You wear his mark, Lozen said, her eyes hard. But you do not know what it means. She leaned closer, the firelight carving deep shadows into her face. There was a prophecy about Taza. The shaman said his path would be strange, that his greatest strength and his greatest weakness would be found in the heart of his enemy. Clara's mouth went dry. You think I think nothing, Lozen cut her off. I only see what is. I see a dying warrior who began to heal the day you arrived. I see a divided council that argues over a white woman instead of the coming war. I see a prophecy coming true, whether we want it to or not. Lozen's face was grim. Because of this doubt, because of you, Taza must prove he is still our weapon. He rides at dawn. He will lead a raid against the soldiers' supply lines. But he's not healed, Clara protested. He can't. He must, Lozen said, her voice final. And if he dies tomorrow, his blood will be on your hands. The words were a physical blow. Clara stumbled from Lozen's wickiup, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She found Taza by the horse lines, preparing his black stallion. In his full war paint and regalia, he was a terrifying, beautiful sight. Lozen talks too much, he said without turning around. Don't go, she pleaded. This is suicide. It's just pride. He turned and the man she had nursed was gone. In his place was the soul taker, the legend. His eyes were cold steel. This is not about pride, he said, his voice a low growl. This is about reminding them why they fear my name. It's about ensuring that no one ever dares to harm you. Everything I do tomorrow, I do for you. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He gently touched the blue stones at her throat. So you will be safe when I am gone. Don't talk like that. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. His hand cupped her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. Promise me something, Clara. If I do not return, live. Do not just survive. Live. Promise me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Come back. He looked at her for a long, timeless moment. Watch the sunrise, and he said, if the eagles circle the canyon 3 times, I am alive. If they do not, he didn't need to finish. He swung onto his horse, gave her one last look that seemed to burn her image into his soul, and rode to join the other warriors. Clara stood alone in the darkness, the weight of the prophecy crushing her. She was his strength. She was his weakness. At dawn, she stood with the women, her eyes locked on the sky. The war party was a line of dark specks disappearing into the horizon. Then she saw it, an eagle soaring high above the canyon rim. It circled once. Her heart leaped. A second eagle joined it. They circled together. Twice. She held her breath, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She scanned the vast empty blue of the sky, praying, pleading with a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Come on, just one more. The 2 eagles drifted away. The sky remained empty. The sun climbed higher. The third eagle never came. The silence was louder than any war cry. 2 eagles, not 3. The promise was broken. The hours that followed were a special kind of hell. The scout, Yellow Horse, returned near midday, his horse lathered, his eyes wide with horror. Ambush. The soldiers were waiting. They had repeating rifles. It was a massacre. Yellow Horse listed the names of the dead. With each name, a woman's wail cut through the air. And Taza? It was White Eagle who asked the question everyone was afraid to voice. The scout's face was a mixture of awe and terror. Taza, he said, had done the impossible. When they were pinned down, he charged the soldiers' line. Alone, a single warrior against 100 guns. He drew their fire, creating a distraction that allowed the few survivors to escape. But where is he? The chief demanded. Yellow Horse shook his head. He was alive when they last saw him, wounded, pursued, heading into the treacherous peaks of the Devil's Backbone. But no man could survive that. Not wounded, not hunted. The debate erupted immediately. To send a rescue party would be suicide. To do nothing was to abandon their greatest warrior. Walking Bear argued loudest. Taza chose his fate. He has been weakened by the white woman. Let the spirits claim him. He was looking directly at Clara. In his eyes, she saw not grief, but triumph. He wanted Taza dead, and in that moment, Clara knew what she had to do. She grabbed Yellow Horse's arm. Where? She demanded in her broken Apache. Show me the path. Lozen appeared at her side as if from smoke. You would die before you reach the foothills, the old warrior woman said. Clara touched the blue stones at her throat. Then I die, she said, her voice ringing with a certainty that surprised even herself. But I will not stand here and do nothing. A slow smile spread across Lozen's weathered face. The prophecy is not yet finished, she declared. To a stunned crowd, she barked, 2 horses, the fast ones, and supplies. We ride. They rode like the devil was chasing them. Lozen knew the mountains like the lines on her hand, leading them through paths invisible to Clara. As night fell, they found the trail. A single drop of blood on a rock, then another. They followed it on foot, up a treacherous cliff face, to a shallow cave. And he was there. He was propped against the rock wall, his rifle across his lap. A fresh bullet wound bled sluggishly from his side. His face was a mask of pain, but his eyes were alive, and they were fixed on her. I'm dreaming, he rasped as she dropped to her knees beside him. You're not real. Real enough to be furious with you, she said, her hands already probing the wound. You promised me 3 eagles. Eagles don't lie, he whispered, his hand finding hers. You shouldn't be here. Soldiers, Lozen said from the cave mouth. They found the trail. They will be here by morning. I can't move, Taza gritted out. The bullet's still in me. Lozen pulled a long, thin knife from her belt. She looked at Clara. My hands are too old. They shake. Her eyes were hard as flint. You will do it, or he will die before the sun rises. I can't. Choose, Lozen said. Clara looked at Taza, at the man who had ridden into a wall of bullets to protect her, the man who had seen the fire in her when everyone else saw only a victim. Her hands, which had been trembling, grew steady. Tell me what to do. What followed was a nightmare of blood and whispered instructions. Clara cut into his flesh with Lozen's knife. Taza's body went rigid, a low groan escaping his lips as he bit down on a strip of leather. Her hands were slick with his blood, but she didn't stop. She pushed past the fear, past the horror, and found the small lead ball lodged against his rib. When she finally pulled it free, he passed out. For a terrifying second, she thought he was dead. Then his chest rose in a shallow breath. "You have a healer's hands," Lozen said, already applying a poultice of herbs, "and a warrior's heart." They worked together, binding his wounds. As they did, Lozen told her the rest of the story. The ambush wasn't just soldiers. Warriors loyal to Walking Bear had been there, and they had pulled back at a crucial moment, leaving Taza's flank exposed. It was a setup. Walking Bear had tried to have him killed. As dawn broke, Taza stirred. His eyes found Clara's. "Why?" he whispered, his voice raw. "Why risk everything for me?" Clara thought of a dozen answers. Duty, pity, gratitude. But only one was the truth. "Because you would have come for me," she said. The walls he kept around his heart seemed to crumble. He reached for her, his fingers lacing with hers. "Soldiers!" Lozen's urgent whisper cut through the moment. From the cave, they could see them in the valley below, a patrol of 6 men moving steadily closer. "Leave me," Taza ordered. "Take Clara. Go." "No," Clara said, her voice like steel. "We all leave, or none of us do." She looked to Lozen. "Is there another way?" Lozen's smile was grim. "There is always another way, if you are willing to pay the price." Getting Taza onto a horse was agony. He was a dead weight, barely conscious. Clara mounted behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, holding him upright, feeling every pained breath he took. "This is madness," he muttered against her ear. "Yes," she whispered back, her cheek pressed against his back. "Beautiful madness. Your words, remember?" The path Lozen chose was a nightmare carved into the side of the mountain. A narrow ledge with a 1,000-foot drop, so treacherous the soldiers would never follow. Hours passed in a blur of terror and adrenaline. They finally descended into a hidden valley as the sun set. A place so secluded it felt like a secret the mountains had kept for centuries. That night, as Taza slept fitfully by the fire, Clara stood watch. She had cut into his flesh, held his life in her bloody hands, and refused to let go. She had crossed a line. She was no longer Clara Mitchell, the shopkeeper's daughter. She didn't know who she was, but she knew where she belonged. Right here. "No regrets?" Lozen asked, joining her by the fire. Clara looked at Taza's face, peaceful in the flickering light. "None," she said, and she meant it. "Good," Lozen nodded. "The path ahead will be harder still, but you are strong enough for what comes next." Clara didn't know what was coming next, but as she listened to the steady rhythm of Taza's breathing, she knew she would face it. Not as a captive, not as a victim, but as the woman who walked into the heart of the storm and refused to be broken. The dust cloud on the horizon was a death sentence. For 2 months they had lived in the hidden winter camp, a brief, fragile peace. Taza had healed, his strength returning, and in the quiet moments between the fear, something beautiful had grown between them. But peace was never meant to last. The army had found them, hundreds of soldiers, a blue river of death flowing into their valley. "Someone talked," White Eagle said, his old face grim. The camp exploded into controlled chaos. Clara stood on the ridge, watching the soldiers advance, and she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. The baker's daughter must have escaped, must have led them here. Taza was already with the war council, his face set like stone. He was the legend again, the warrior his people needed. But Clara knew the man underneath, and her heart ached for him. The decision was made quickly. The army would attack at dawn. The tribe would melt away into the mountains under the cover of darkness. But first there was a reckoning. White Eagle gathered the entire tribe. "The soldiers have come for their people," he announced. His voice echoed across the clearing. "Any white captive who wishes to leave may go now." Sarah and the 2 other women surged forward, their faces filled with desperate hope. Then White Eagle's eyes found her. "Clara Mitchell, you are free to go." Every eye in the camp turned to her. This was it, the final choice. She could walk away, go back to the white world or what was left of it. The soldiers would protect her. She could have a life again, a normal life. Her gaze locked with Tassa's across the clearing. His face was an unreadable mask, but she saw the tension in his hands. He would not stop her. He would let her go. He was giving her a choice he'd never had. And in his sacrifice, she found her answer. Slowly, deliberately, she unfastened the necklace of blue stones, the symbol of his protection, the symbol of her bondage, and her belonging. She walked through the silent crowd to where Sarah stood trembling. She pressed the necklace into the other girl's hand. "Take this," Clara whispered. "When you reach the soldiers, tell them Clara Mitchell died in the raid on Bitter Creek. Tell them she's been dead for months." "Clara, no," Sarah gasped. "You can't stay. This isn't your life." "It is now," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Go. Live." She turned and walked back through the parted sea of Apache warriors. She stopped directly in front of Tassa, in front of the entire tribe, and lifted her chin. "If you will have me," she said, her voice ringing out in clear Apache, "I choose to stay." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Tassa's mask of control finally broke. A look of fierce, incredulous pride shone in his eyes. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing her cheek in that achingly familiar way. "You impossible woman," he murmured in English, for her ears only. Then louder, in Apache, for all to hear. "She is mine. I claim her before the spirits and before our people. He who challenges this, speaks now." Silence. Even Walking Bear, his face a thundercloud of fury, said nothing. White Eagle nodded slowly. "Then it is done? The white woman Clara Mitchell is dead." He looked at Clara, a strange light of approval in his old eyes. "Who are you then? Who stands before us now?" Clara looked at Taza, at the life she was choosing, at the world she was embracing. The old names didn't fit anymore. She spoke the name the women had been whispering about her, the name that felt like truth. "I am Walks Between World," she declared. A murmur of shock and respect rippled through the tribe. She had not just stayed, she had been reborn. As they fled into the mountains that night, riding beside Tassa, she was no longer a captive. She was not Apache, not yet. She was something new, something forged in fire and blood and an impossible love. Clara Mitchell was dead. In her place rode Walks Between Worlds, and she would never look back. But the dust cloud on the horizon was still there. The soldiers were still coming. She had chosen her home. Now she would have to fight for it. The final battle came with the spring rains. The army had hounded them for months, and now they were cornered in a muddy, desolate valley. There was no more running. Clara lay beside a rocky outcrop, Taza's spare rifle cool and steady in her hands. The girl who fainted at the sight of blood was long gone. In her place was a woman who knew how to shoot, how to fight, how to survive. The battle was a chaotic hell of noise and fear. Artillery shells screamed overhead. Bullets whined like angry insects. The Apache fought with the desperate courage of a people defending their last breath. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. It was never going to be enough. A soldier broke through their line, charging toward a group of women and children. Clara didn't hesitate. She aimed, fired. The soldier crumpled. She felt nothing but a grim, cold resolve. "Clara!" Lozen was calling to her, gesturing from behind a rock. But as Clara ran to her, she saw the dark stains spreading across the old warrior's side. "The children, hidden in the cave." Lozen gasped, pressing a small leather pouch into Clara's hand. "For later, when you need strength." And then the light went out of her eyes. Lozen was gone. The Apache line was breaking everywhere. Clara fought her way toward Tassa, a desperate, primal need to be by his side. She found him rallying the last handful of warriors, his face a mask of mud and war paint. "You should have run," he yelled over the gunfire, pulling her behind a boulder. "We've had this conversation," she yelled back, reloading her rifle. 2 shots left. "White Eagle is dead," he said, his voice grim. "Walking Bear is dead. This is the end, Clara." "No, you will live," he said, his voice turning to iron. Just then a bugle sounded. The final assault. Taza did the one thing she never expected. He stood up. He walked out into the open, into the kill zone between the two lines. "Colonel Morrison," he shouted in perfect English, "I know you are out there. It is Taza." The shooting slowed. A tall, gray-haired officer stepped out from the Army's line. "I have the white woman," Taza called out. "Clara Mitchell. I will trade her for the safe passage of our women and children." "No!" The word was ripped from Clara's throat as she ran out after him. "Taza, don't do this!" He caught her, his arms a steel trap. "Trust me," he whispered in Apache, his voice urgent. "One last time. Please." Colonel Morrison looked from Taza's fierce, protective grip to Clara's Apache dress and sun-darkened skin. He saw the truth, but Taza was offering him an easy end to a bloody war. "Miss Mitchell," the colonel said carefully, "have you been harmed?" This was the final test. Her answer would seal their fates. She could scream the truth, declare her love, and die by his side. Or she could give him what he wanted, his people's survival, her survival. She looked into Taza's eyes and saw the desperate plea there. She saw a love so powerful it was willing to sacrifice itself. Her heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I have been his prisoner," she forced the words out, the lie tasting like poison. "Please, I want to go home." The light in Taza's eyes died. He shoved her roughly toward the colonel. "Take her, and keep your promise." "You have my word," Morrison said, his gaze holding a strange respect for the Apache warrior. "And you?" "I am Taza," he said, straightening to his full, magnificent height. "I die a warrior." It happened in a heartbeat. A young, enraged Apache brave, seeing Clara in the colonel's grasp, raised his rifle. Taza moved without thinking. He threw himself in front of the colonel. The shot rang out. It hit Taza square in the chest. He staggered, then fell into the mud. "No!" Clara tore free, dropping to her knees beside him, the world dissolving into a blur of red. His blood was everywhere, hot and sticky on her hands. "My choice," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her face one last time. His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You live, Clara, for both of us. That is an order." He pressed a small, carved stone wolf into her palm. "I love you," she sobbed, the words she'd never said aloud pouring out in a torrent of grief. "I choose you. I will always choose you." A faint, beautiful smile touched his lips. "And I choose the fire." His hand fell away. Soldiers were pulling her back, their voices a meaningless drone. She fought, she screamed, she clawed at them, but it was useless. The last thing she saw was his body, still and broken in the mud, as the rain began to fall, washing the blood into the thirsty earth. They wrapped her in a blanket. They told her she was safe. They called her Clara Mitchell. But Clara Mitchell had died in a fire a lifetime ago, and Walks Between Worlds had died in the mud with the man she loved. The person who was left was just a ghost, haunted by the memory of a warrior's smile and the impossible choice she'd been forced to make. She would live, as he had ordered, a life sentence. She would carry his story and their love, a secret fire in the ashes of her heart. The Army called it a victory, a savage frontier finally tamed, but all she would ever see was the cost. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. What part of Clara and Taza's journey hit you the hardest? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories that dig into the light and dark of our shared history, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It tells us you want more tales just like this one. We'll see you in the next story.